What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Absolute Flash storyline. And what we do here is we pick up with Eleanor and Wally West's father. Now, in case you don't know what's going on, I will fill you in as we get through this video. But where Rudy is talking to Eleanor, and it's just kind of like, you don't have to do this, right? We're on the same side. Her response, we were never on the same side, West. Your work here was only ever the cover story. Barry Allen and I had a higher calling, work that began with my grandfather decades ago. Allen found a way in to the other world. We call it the still point. But after he died, the doorway snapped shut, and I've been unable to reopen it. But now I see a way back. Like it or not, Wally has become pivotal to everything my grandfather worked for. Now, of course, in that moment, Rudy, learning that his son is being used as a pawn by Eleanor for some pretty nefarious purposes, goes to the attack. But there's only really so much he can do. He's like surrounded by her henchmen. And so, of course, they subdue him, and Eleanor just says, bring him back to the command hub and restrain him properly this time. And then, of course, the question is asked, what do we do about the rogues? And Eleanor just says, Captain Cold and the others gave up their lives the moment they decided to go rogue. After everything they've seen here, they cannot be allowed to live. So, a bit of a refresher on what's going on. Eleanor's grandfather, right, Eobard, had discovered what you and I would basically refer to as the absolute universe speed force, the source of speedster powers. Now, we don't definitively know if that's what it is. We know it's tied into the power of Darkseid, like pretty much everything in the absolute universe is. But when Eobard discovered it, the door kind of shut. There was no way for it to really be accessed again. Barry Allen was the one who basically figured it out. And while initially he thought he was working with Eleanor for the betterment of humanity, as we know from both the Absolute Flash comic and the Absolute Justice League comic, Eleanor's a straight up villain, and she was just using Barry Allen for her own purposes, which was to access this place. One, to retrieve her grandfather most likely, but two, to learn this source of power and harness it for herself. Because as we know from just the Absolute universe in general, Absolute Joker, Ra's al Ghul, Eleanor, the list goes on and on and on. All these villains are all just trying to acquire massive amounts of power for themselves to be used for their own purposes. When Wally became the Flash, he was the key to the door. And now that he's coming back, they're trying to figure out a way to use him. And so at that point, you switch over to the Rogues alongside Wally. Now again, the Rogues had basically turned against Eleanor. And at this point, it's kind of joining forces. I would go so far as to say that they're essentially becoming good guys here. And where they initially subdue the Trickster, who of course we ended up learning was actually a spy for Eleanor among the Rogues, Captain Cold tells Digger, right, have your drones do a recon loop. Thawne knows that we're coming, and I don't want any more surprises. And so, of course, Digger Harkness fires his boomerangs out, and Captain Cold says, I don't know about the rest of you, but I have a farm to get back to, and I fully intend to get back there in one piece. And so at that point, you switch over to Wally talking to Grodd. And one of the things that Grodd has really historically done over the Absolute Flash comics is form a connection with Wally West, insofar as he used his abilities to demonstrate to Wally as best he could. Their stories are not that dissimilar. In fact, they're really kind of struggling with the same thing here. They're figuring out their place in the bigger picture, giving these newfound abilities, but both their fathers are captured, and both of them seek to free their fathers. And that's kind of what goes on here, right? Because Wally has the ability to telepathically communicate with Grodd, only because Grodd created a psychic link between the two of them. So of course, Wally tells him, we'll find them, Grodd, I promise. But in that moment, everything around them starts to get exceedingly hot, and that's when Heatwave shows up, right? Mick Rory makes his appearance here. Now, technically, he did appear previously in the Absolute Flash comic. The fight was relatively short-lived, and it was Wally just kind of siphoning the heat off of him, so Wally learning his Flash powers, which in reality are just traditional Flash abilities, right? The ability to take down the heat of Heatwave by just creating a kind of tornado of sorts that siphons the heat off of him and pulling that power off. The issue with this is that, of course, the Rogues all know Mick Rory. He was one of their own before he was taken by Eleanor and turned into Heatwave. And so in that moment, the Rogues go to deal with Mick when they tell Wally, get into the facility and see what's going on with Eleanor. And so, of course, with Wally making his way into the facility, Trickster kind of communicates this to Eleanor, who of course tells Trickster, find a way to slow Wally down, or at the very least, contain him as best you can. Now, it's not destroying Wally. It's not eliminating him entirely. In fact, it's serving a particular purpose, because what ends up happening is that when Wally gets inside this facility, he kind of starts to experience these almost psychic projections, and you can make a legitimate argument that he's kind of experiencing multiple moments in time. But when this happens, it's just Wally and Barry at a previous point in time talking to each other. That Barry asked the question, so, did your dad tell you anything about what we're doing here at Fort Knox? Of course, Wally in this projection says not really, just research stuff. He and I don't really talk about his work very much. It's basically the moments from the beginning of Absolute Flash, from like issue 1 and 2, when Wally was first encountering Barry and first learning about what was taking place within Fort Knox. And so, of course, much like in those comics, Barry asked the question, so what do you two talk about? And Wally just says, honestly, not much, right? Since Mom died, he and I haven't really had that much in common. And Barry just says, yeah, right, me and my old man too. And so this leads to Wally going after Barry. This is an important thing, not because Wally is physically chasing Barry down, but because Barry and Wally are going to the lab of Barry, and that's where Wally needs to get to, right? Kind of recollecting these moments. And so Wally just kind of continues on and listens to the conversation. When the younger Wally in this projection asks the question, what exactly do you guys do down here? And Barry just kind of jokes, right? Making human-animal hybrids, of course. That's exactly what we're doing down here. But then, of course, Wally experiences the moment when he got his powers and kind of asked the question, Dad, are you there? These are things that we've kind of noticed over the course of the run up to this point in time, that Wally would suddenly experience these moments seemingly inexplicably, where he would experience all these different moments in one time, moments from his own past, and sometimes individuals that dealt with him, moments when he was scared, when he first got his powers, moments when he was talking to Barry. It's all kind of coming together. And what we're really seeing here is seemingly time manipulation without the cosmic treadmill. It's kind of cool, right? One of the cool things about the Absolute Universe is that it does give Jeff Lemire free reign on how these powers and abilities can be adjusted based on the Flash mythos. And so that's where this projection of Barry, right? Dad, I think I messed up really bad. At the same time, it's the conversation with Barry and Wally in the past, because now we have two projections at the same time. Barry's saying Project Olympus, and he doesn't really finish it. He just says, I can't really tell you everything, but we're working at the very razor's edge of physics and biology. And the younger Wally in that projection asks, isn't this like super classified? And yet the older Wally, once he got his powers, Dr. Allen, are you here? So again, just experiencing these multiple moments all at the same time. And it overwhelms him, right? Because one of the things to keep in mind about Wally is he's experiencing the nature of his powers for the very first time. He's experiencing all these things for the first time. And so just getting a grasp on the ability to run super fast alone was enough for him to handle. You start adding in things like psychic projections or being able to see multiple points in time happening at the same time, it throws him for a loop. And so while he has experienced this a few times before, Grodd is the one that brings him down. And in fact, that's what always happens. Whenever the abilities of Wally become too much for him to bear, Grodd brings him in. But here's one of the issues with that, because now we're talking about what's essentially a crutch, right? Wally's inability to cope with his powers on his own, which is really kind of a core part of the Flash mythos. It's a rite of passage in the main DC universe. The abilities are exceedingly overwhelming when you first get them. You have to learn to control them, and only then can you become the best version of yourself as the Flash. Barry, Jay, Max Mercury, Wally West of the main DC universe, Jesse Quick, Johnny Quick, they all kind of had to figure this out on their own or with maybe some kind of a mentor. But that's where, once he's brought down, he just tells Grodd, right, I don't know what's happening to me. But in that moment, Grodd is just kind of hyper-focused on one of the cells, and his father's gone. And so where Wally says, hey, like, we will find him, Trickster shows up, right, just says, not so fast, Red, and Wally takes off as fast as possible. And that's when you realize he's a rat in a maze, because Eleanor chimes in to Trickster and says, that's it, keep him moving. And Trickster asks, right, are you sure this is going to work? And the response of Eleanor, just get him to Alan's lab, corner him there, and make him feel threatened. His power will take care of the rest. That's why he's the key. only the power that he has can tap into what's effectively the Speed Force, can access it. And so at that point, you jump back to the Rogues. And again, they're hitting Heatwave with everything they possibly have, but they can't quite bring him down. And in fact, it's not actually the Rogues that take Heatwave out, when they're all just kind of getting completely manhandled. And even just like Captain Boomerang's like, we have to retreat, guys, or we are going to die here. It suddenly starts raining, right? It starts thunderstorming, and the heat of Heatwave is literally dissipated. The weather puts it out. And that's when you find out Weather Wizard has arrived here in order to help the Rogues in dealing with Eleanor. So essentially, these traditional villains of the Flash are now becoming good guys. They're becoming allies. And so at that point, Wally keeps running through the facility and gets to the lab of Barry, right? Where this just huge source of energy is going off. The same source of energy that Eleanor's been trying to access this entire time. And so again, Wally sees these projections, right? Him coming down and seeing what's happening with his father beating the crap out of Barry Allen. Just all these small moments in his own history kind of coming together. And so when that happens, he keeps getting chased over and over and over again. And so he effectively stands his ground, right, inside this lab against the Trickster, right? He says, enough, Trickster, stop it. And the Trickster just says, why don't you make me? And in fact, throws what's basically a bomb at Grodd and almost kills him, right? Wally freaks out and then immediately attacks Trickster, or at least grabs a bomb and throws it back into this source of energy. And then at that point, all of it starts to emanate, right? This just kind of energy source starts fluctuating, changing and shifting, and a hand reaches out for Wally West. Now, we've seen this voice or heard this voice multiple times, right? It reached out to multiple people every single time. It just says Wally, right? And Wally himself looks at that and thinks it's Barry. And when the voice says Wally West, Wally reaches for the hand and he's like, it's you, right? It's you, isn't it? And just says Wally. And the two of them take hands and he says, it's me, Barry. I'm here. But his father, watching all of this unfold in a whole other room, is like, Wally, don't. And that's when you find out it's not Barry at all. It's Eobard Thawne, right? He says, not Barry, Thawne, and just grabs Wally West. And in that moment, Eleanor, watching all of it, is just like, grandfather? And he just looks at her and then looks back at Wally and says, there can be only one. Grabs Wally and then throws him into the source of energy, basically throwing him into the Speed Force. He goes crash landing right onto this kind of material, right? What looks like a kind of broken building or skyscraper or what have you, only to be met with the actual Barry Allen, kind of the energy source of Barry Allen. He's almost non-corporeal, like a liquid trying to take some measure of a shape. And he just says, Wally, welcome home. So essentially, Wally's in the Speed Force. And I would go so far as to say that what Wally's basically learning here now, or getting ready to learn, is exactly how to harness his powers, because seemingly Barry already has. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Absolute Reverse Flash looks amazing. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.